Alright folks, how you doing? So in this video I'll be reacting to Dan Snow rates portrayals of English kings and queens in movies. In this case, Edward I in Braveheart.
Edward I in Braveheart. As you'd expect from one of the most historically inaccurate films ever.
Definitely agree with him on that. I'm going to turn the volume up a little, it's a bit quiet. It is definitely one of the most historically inaccurate films ever. There's no argument there.
I think this scene is just weird. First of all, royal chambers would have been lush. They would not have been exposed cold stone like that. There would have been hangings, tapestries, whitewashing. It would have felt a lot more comfortable.
They would have had straw on the floor. They probably would have had a hearth, which is like a fireplace. The brazier behind Edward over his shoulder here would have been lit. Why are they sitting freezing? And why is Edward wearing chainmail here? He's just going to have a talk with his son. It's not like he's exactly a threat, especially the way he's portrayed in this movie.
What news of the North?
And this is the fantastically homophobic bit of the film. Edward II is portrayed as sort of limp-wristed, weak, effeminate, gay person. There were rumours around homosexuality. He was very, very close to Piers Gaveston, who's portrayed here as his friend. And they may have had what we now think was a gay relationship. But Edward also was married and had children, as was Piers Gaveston. So I think the reality of their relationship is a lot more complex than it's being portrayed here.
I tend to agree. I haven't found anything to suggest that Edward II was gay. Even if he was, who cares? You know, it's 2023. We don't really give a shit about that anymore. But, you know, I also agree with Dan that this is extremely homophobic. To the point of being offensive. I mean, this would not be cool today, you know.
I have ordered conscriptions. They're assembled and ready to depart.
Edward I, known as Longshanks, that was a contemporary nickname. He was indeed very tall, long shanks, long legs, that was accurate. He was very tall indeed, over 6 foot. William Wallace actually was very tall as well, so two of them hugely tall.
That's very true. I've made videos about that before. Wallace, on his mother's side, the Crawford side of the family, was descended from Thor Longus, which means Thor the Tall, and he was about 6'9". As for Edward, I'm not sure how tall he was. I think about 6'5", something like that. That's because the blood of Atlantis ran through in them back in those days, back when the blood of Atlantis wasn't as diluted as it is these days. I'm the tallest member of my family, by the way, and I'm 5'11". So the blood of Atlantis is all but gone, unfortunately.
And here you see that the messenger bring in supposedly the head of the governor of York, who was killed by William Wallace. He was the king's nephew. There is no evidence this took place at all.
That's true, that didn't happen. According to Henry the Minstrel, and I do have to asterisk this point, according to the Minstrel, if you believe his version of events, York surrendered voluntarily, which is not accepted by mainstream history. You know, most mainstream historians accept that Wallace never got that far. But the Minstrel says that he did, and he was going by the account of a man called John Blair, who was the personal chaplain of Wallace and was by his side pretty much his whole life. So I believe that Wallace did, quote unquote, you know, attack York, but it was more like a voluntary surrender. And actually the Yorkmen and the Scots feasted together for about 3 weeks after they surrendered, according to the Minstrel. So, you know, the Northern English and the Scots had a lot more in common than the Northern English and the Southern English. It's probably due to the actions of William the Conqueror and the Normans, but that's a whole other story. In fact, that's how Thor Longus came to Scotland in the first place. The progenitor of Clan Crawford. He came to Scotland to ally with the Scots against the Normans. That was 10 generations back on Wallace's mother's side, but yeah, you can look into that in other videos.
York was not attacked and sacked by William Wallace, and no member of the Plantagenet family was beheaded during that imaginary episode. It is true that William Wallace raided into northern England and was a nuisance, but he never sacked England's second city.
That is true, whether you believe Henry the Minstrel or not. York was not sacked. It was attacked, but it surrendered. He did attack a castle called Ramswaith, I think it was called, which was further north. It's near Richmondshire in England, which is not anywhere really close to York, if I remember correctly. But yeah, that was a very cruel episode where Wallace burned down a castle that was garrisoned by a nephew of Longshanks, and when he found out who he was, he beheaded him and released the women and children from the castle, which he burned down. He opened the back door and allowed the women and children out, and shut the back door when the men tried to run out. A particularly cruel episode. And he beheaded this man called Fahue, and he sent his widow to London with Fahue's head, basically saying, "You're next, motherfucker." So that was according to the minstrel as well. Mainstream history probably doesn't accept that. But if you look up Ramswaith Castle, it's a huge castle in the north of England. You know, I call it the Carrack of the North because when I compare it to Carrack Castle, which was a Crusader castle, it looks pretty similar. It doesn't exist really anymore. You see a couple of ruins of it. I might do a separate video on that in the future. But you can see just from the outline that this was a big, big castle. Like, this was meant to be a central fortification, and Wallace cleverly sacked it by setting fire to the woods that surrounded it and setting fire to the door. So he never really attacked the castle directly. His lieutenant John the Graham wanted to, but Wallace was like, "No, that's fucking stupid, because look how strong it is. We'll lose like hundreds of men trying to do that." So instead of actually attacking the castle directly, they stocked up wood all along the sides of the stone walls, and the top of the castle was made out of wood, and they just set fire to it and burned them all out. And they all burned to death, except for the women and children, because Wallace, according to the minstrel, never killed the innocents.
What advice would you offer on the present situation?
It is also untrue that Piers Gaveston was thrown out of the window.
Yes, that's true, but I'm sure a lot of people would have liked to have thrown him out the window if they'd had the chance.
By Edward I, Edward Longshanks. So, all in all, this scene is totally made up.
Yeah, it is. I cannot argue with Dan on that one. It is complete bullshit.
It's a figment of Mel Gibson's slightly homophobic brain.
Well, not just Mel Gibson, but also Randall Wallace, because Randall Wallace wrote the damn thing.
Piers Gaveston did end up being brutally murdered during the very unhappy reign of Edward II, a hugely unsuccessful king. Edward II would end up being deposed by his wife and her lover.
And according to Mel Gibson, he died by having a hot poker shoved up his ass. I'm sure that's in the commentary for Braveheart. I'm sure I heard that.
And had a very unpleasant death.
Apparently he screams so loud they can hear him across the other side of the English Channel in France. I mean, that would be a pretty bad way to go.
Nobles. No.
I made a video about this. This is complete bullshit. This would never happen because the English would be excommunicated from the church, and they would be basically the lepers of Europe. They would be completely ostracized by the rest of Christendom if they did anything like this.
Nobles are the key to the door of Scotland. Grant our...
It's a very chilling scene, this one, in which the evil tyrant, Edward I, comes up with the idea of allowing prima nocte, which is this sense that if you're a nobleman, you're allowed to have sex with any woman on your estate on the night of their marriage. There's no evidence that this was a thing. There's no evidence that Edward I encouraged it, allowed it, but it's certainly a very...
No, if this ever happened, Edward would be on their ass so fast they'd be back to England like in 2 days. Edward would never allow this because, according to the minstrel, again, and going by his account, Edward was trying to subtly take over Scotland and kind of get us to come on his side through coercion, but not in a violent way at first, but more like through playing nice. So if any English governors were doing any shit like this, man, they would be in fucking serious trouble. The English bend over backwards, in fact. When you read the account of Minstrel, it almost seems like Wallace is the bad guy in a way, because the English were really trying to gently seduce the Scots into cooperating with them. I mean, they bent over backwards to accommodate Wallace time and time again. If it wasn't for his uncle Ranald Crawford interceding on his behalf to Lord Percy, who was the governor of Ayr and that kind of western part of Scotland, you know, Wallace would have been in a lot of trouble. His uncle had to stick his neck out for him time and time again. But Wallace was just belligerent all the time, just wouldn't fucking go for it at all. But no, the English, without getting too sidetracked, the English were bending over fucking backwards to placate the Scots and try to get them to cooperate with them. And if anyone was doing any shit like this, believe me, Edward would get to them before Wallace did. They'd be fucking hung, drawn, and quartered. This would never happen. When you read the account of the minstrel, you begin to appreciate that the English were really trying hard to play nice. They would never allow this. It's total nonsense.
Chilling moment.
And I don't say that as an English apologist. This is the account of the minstrel I'm going by, the way that it's written by him. It's not my personal opinion.
Then we see the Princess of Wales. Edward I, strangely attracted to his pretty French daughter-in-law. It's worth pointing out that at this stage, she was not in England because she was only a child.
Yeah, she's a stand-in for Queen Margaret, who was a French princess, and she was the sister of King Philip of France. And if Edward ever fucking did anything like this towards Queen Margaret, he would be in so much trouble. Not just with King Philip, but with the Pope and with Christendom in general. Kings do not fucking act like this in medieval Europe or Christendom. This is such fucking nonsense. And of all the things that Edward Longshanks was guilty of, why the hell did you have to make anything up? You could go into his expulsion of the Jews, for example, in 1290, and all the edicts that were being issued before that. Why the fuck do you need to make anything up about Edward? His real life deeds were way than anything that's seen in Braveheart, and this is just implied. You can actually go into what he really did, but whatever.
And she did not come to England and marry Prince Edward until years after Wallace's death.
Exactly. The real, bride of Edward II, nothing to do with any of it.
The trouble with Scotland is that it's full of Scots.
Yeah, this movie is just anti-English propaganda. Essentially, that is what it is. Apparently, The Patriot is the same. I haven't seen The Patriot, but I've heard it's basically Braveheart 2.0. The British, the English are evil, and whoever they're against is good, whether it be the Scots or the Americans or whatever. But yeah, it is complete bullshit. And I'm not apologising for England, it just is what it is.
I love the idea that you have important royal meetings with people wearing mail, what people call chainmail, armour, including the headgear.
Yeah, why the fuck are they wearing armour? Are they expected to get into a fight with each other? It's complete nonsense. That shit is heavy. I've actually owned a suit of chainmail before. Man, if you wear that for more than like an hour, your shoulders really start to ache and sag, and your muscles really start to ache. This stuff is fucking heavy. You wouldn't be walking around wearing this stuff all day long, I guarantee you. This is why knights have squires and pages and all the rest, to look after their horse and look after their armor and to polish it and to keep it in battle condition and ready. But you don't just fucking walk around wearing armor all day. That is a good way to really tire yourself out and injure yourself. You'd end up pulling your tendons and all this sort of thing. You'd end up injuring your muscles. All these knights would be in tremendous physical shape. But even then, even if you're in like Schwarzenegger, type condition, even if you're Stallone, you don't wear fucking armor all day. Are you kidding me? It's a good way to tear your muscles, and pull your tendons and cause yourself all kinds of injuries.
What are they doing? Are they expected to come to blows in this important royal meeting? No.
They would be wearing their silks and their fineries and all that sort of thing. They would be wearing normal clothes. Well, slightly better than normal clothes. They'd be wearing their best clothes because they're talking to the king.
It's so heavy wearing that stuff. You're only going to wear it on the battlefield.
Exactly. What did I just say?
I think Longshanks is portrayed as a sneering villain in this film who weirdly fancies his daughter-in-law. The truth is a lot more complex. He was certainly a great military leader. He's tough, no question he had to be a successful monarch in those days.
Yeah, look up the Ninth Crusade and the incident with the assassin who poisoned him. Edward turned around and murdered him with his bare hands. that was back when he was Prince Edward before he became king. Look that one up.
He invaded Wales brutally. He did end up taking the crown of Scotland, but before that, he was actually respected in Scotland, and there was actually some harmony. He was admired by many of the noble families of Scotland.
That's largely true. The Balials and the Commons certainly respected him. All the Balians up to a point. But yeah, a lot of the nobles in Scotland who had Norman connections to the Plantagenets certainly respected Longshanks. That is certainly true. There were a lot of noble families who wanted to deal with Longshanks and the Plantagenet Norman court, and would rather play nice with them than join Wallace's side, which was ultimately Wallace's downfall, was that he lacked diplomacy. He was unwilling to accommodate the nobles and see things from their perspective. That's one of the very few things that Braveheart really actually gets right. Wallace was many things, but he was not a diplomat. He was a great leader in the military sense, but he was a horrible leader when it came to politics. That is for fucking sure.
Scotland. So he's a lot. There's a lot more nuance here than is being portrayed. Henry V.
So yeah, well, when I say politics, I mean diplomacy, particularly. There was the Treaty of Rutherglen, was when Aymer Valence, who apparently was a Scot, according to Henry the Minstrel, obviously of Norman lineage, but was married in with the Scottish nobility. He arranged for a meeting between William Wallace and the Chancellor of England, and Wallace was a complete dick to him the whole time. Refused to shake his hand, just glared at him and threatened to kill him if he ever saw him again. So yeah, not exactly the most diplomatic of people. But anyway, hope you enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching.